Hi, my name is Tracy Martirana from Holistic Wellness with Tracy, and today I'm inviting you into my kitchen to join me while I bake bread. I love homemade bread, and really, doesn't everybody? It's so much better than what you can buy in the store. I have just yesterday pulled out of the freezer a loaf that I had frozen and started using it. So now that I'm down to this loaf is my last loaf, it's time to make some more. The recipe that I follow makes 2 loaves of bread. So I typically use one immediately and I freeze one to use later. These are round, sort of artisan looking loaves, so they're beautiful. The recipe that I use is sort of a mishmash of a couple recipes in this book, Flour, Water, Salt, Yeast, which if you're interested in making bread, I highly recommend this book. I use all of the equipment or supplies that he recommends in this book, and I get great bread, and it's really actually fairly simple to make. It does take a little bit of time, but it comes out wonderful. In his book, Ken Forkish is his name, he tells sort of his background story on how he got into making bread and opening a bakery. He gives lots of recipes, everything from a plain white bread to a more whole wheat version, which is still only, I think, 40% whole wheat. And then I sort of combine the two together and I do somewhere in the middle, about like a 20% whole wheat, just because whole wheat makes it, well, it tastes good. And I love the taste of whole wheat bread, but you don't get the big holes as much as you do like a lighter, whiter bread. So I like to go somewhere in the middle. And then I add in oatmeal and sunflower seeds to sort of give it that whole grain feel, if you will. The bread is delicious and actually pretty easy to make. He also has recipes in here for sourdough breads, for pizza dough, for focaccia. So there's lots of stuff in this book other than just a like single loaf of bread. In his book, he offers pretty much 2 ways of making the bread. One, I think he calls it Saturday bread, so that you start it in the morning and you bake it in the evening. And then there's an overnight rise, which is what I typically do, which means I mix up my dough in the evening. It takes a couple hours to go through the whole process, and then you just leave it sitting on the counter overnight and it rises nice and beautifully. So that is what I'm going to do today, with one just note to you. If you have the intentions of doing this, you start the dough and then you realize, oh wait, I can't make this when I think, you can always pop the dough while it's rising into the refrigerator, and that kind of puts it on hold. It slows it way down to buy you some time until you figure your schedule out and get going. I only mention that because there have been plenty of times where I've had really good intentions and thinking I had plenty of time to make bread, and then realized that I don't, and you just have to be able to go with it. This recipe is very forgiving. I have definitely left things to rise too long and it's turned out fine. I've had to cut it a little short. It's turned out fine. That's the kind of recipe I like. Let's get baking. First to note, as I'm preparing my flour and my water and my salt, I use a scale to weigh it out versus scooping and measuring with a measuring spoon, because there's a lot more error in the scooping and leveling than there is in weight. So I have these handy little tubs. I use this big one for the actual dough, and I use the smaller one for each individual ingredient. So I will tear it out, which just means setting it to 0. And I'm going to put in 800 grams of all-purpose flour. Now, I don't know if you can see here, but I just have this bin back here. I bake a lot of bread, so I don't just have one little canister of flour. I have a big bin of flour. And what I do is I buy, I don't know, 4 to 6 5-pound bags of flour at a time. And what I do is I take it, I wrap it in like plastic grocery bags and put it in the freezer for a few days, usually probably close to a week, just to make sure in case there's any little critters living in my flour that they die. And then it stores quite well here in my kitchen. So there's my 800 grams of all-purpose flour. So I'll just pour that into here. And then I want 200 grams of whole wheat flour, which that I have in a smaller canister because I don't use as much. I'll just pour that in to weigh it out. $204, close enough. And I pour that in. And now I need water. So what I'm going to do is go to my sink and fill a pitcher with hot water. I actually have a little thermometer that I will check. I want my water to be about 95 degrees, maybe a little bit warmer. I'm back with my pitcher of water. This is reading about 98, 99 degrees, which that'll be okay. You just want it warm enough that it will stay warm so that by the time we're adding the yeast that it's still fairly warm. I'm adding 290 grams. Is that right? No, 790. I'm like, that can't be right. 790 grams just a little bit over. This is why I go a little bit warmer, because I might cool it down a little bit while I'm playing with the weight. And then I'm going to dump this in here. Now, while I have my scale out, I'm going to also measure out my salt, but I won't need that for a little bit. My recipe calls for, I think it calls for 22, actually it calls for 22 grams of salt, but I'm also going to be adding salted roasted sunflower seeds. So I'm only going to pour in, say, 20 grams. So we'll short it by a couple. Salt is really important when making bread. If you go too skimpy on the salt, you'll definitely notice it instead of very bland bread. And then I just measure out about a half a teaspoon of yeast into another little container just so it's ready when I need it. I buy the yeast, it comes in a pretty big container, so I just pour it into this jar and keep it in my refrigerator. Let's come back to the dough. So we just have flour and water that we combined in here. The first step that you need to do is combine this together. I just use my hand. Sometimes at first it feels really wet, and then you start to stir it around and you're like, oh no, it's way too dry. But the more you mix it, eventually all of the flour becomes moist. This allows me to get into the cracks, kind of squeeze it a little bit if I need to really make sure I incorporate it. What I'm doing here is just allowing all of the flour to be moist, and then we let this sit for half an hour without any yeast, without anything else, just allowing that flour to absorb the water and sort of rehydrate itself. So you can see this is what it looks like, nice and sticky and gooey. And the best way to clean this off is simply to get your other hand wet with nice warm water and then just squeegee off your fingers. And there you go. I'll wash my hands and leave this sit for about half an hour, and then I'll come back to it. Okay, so the dough has been sitting for about half an hour, just the water and the flour together. In my sink, I have this pitcher of just hot water that I can dip my hand in. I'm going to take my dough, uncover it. It's looking just pretty shaggy. Nothing spectacular going on here yet. So I'm going to take my salt and just sprinkle that over the dough. My yeast, sprinkle that over the dough. And then I'm going to wet my hand and then use it. See if I can come over here so you can see a little bit, to just sort of scoop and fold. So I just bring my hand underneath it and then pull it up and fold it over. So I'm just working around in a circle. And then I'm going to re-wet my hand. The water just helps keep all that dough from sticking to me. And then I'm going to come through and I'm just like sort of pinching it. And then doing more scoop and fold. And then I'll pinch again. Here, my goal right now is just to get that salt and yeast all worked into the dough. I'll do one more dip of my hand, one more pincher, one more round of scooping and folding. Now, if you look at it here now, you can see it's much firmer. It's holding itself a little bit more into a ball, not quite so shaggy looking. I'm just going to put the top back on and let it sit for another 30 minutes. A half hour has passed, so it's time to fold again. To take the top off, you can see what was a pretty tight ball. It's kind of loosened up as it sat here. I'm also going to use this time to add in some oatmeal and some sunflower seeds because I like that whole grain rustic feel that it gives to the bread. I'm going to do just shy of a half a cup of each. And then just like I did previously, I will wet my hand and use that to sort of mix it all together. So I'm wetting it in hot water. Again, so I'm keeping the dough warm-ish, not letting it cool too much. So I'm just doing the going under, pulling up, and pressing down, and then using my fingers to squish it. Wet my hand again as I feel it getting sticky. And again, pull from underneath and just keep working it. And again, just like last time, now it went from being really soft and now it's a little firmer, holding a ball shape just a little bit more. So I'll put the top back on it and wait another 30 minutes to fold again. And I'm back for the final fold before we let this bulk rise. So again, you can see it's loosened back up again. I'm going to wet my hand and just go around the edge, scooping and folding. So pulling up to stretch a little bit. And then bringing it back. And I can feel, as soon as I make it around once, I can feel it start to tighten up. Giving it a little shake, letting it get nice and firm. And that's all there is to it. And now it's back in a fairly tight ball. I'm going to put the top on and let this sit overnight, and I will come back in the morning and continue on. Good morning. As you can see, the dough went from being that hard little ball in the center to this big fluffy mass in here. You can see it's got some big, it has a really big bubble. I don't know if you can see that, but it's bubbly and looks sort of light and fluffy. And what I'm going to do, make sure that's not hot, and then I'm going to put some flour on my counter and make this into 2 round loaves. And actually what I should be doing, instead of flouring directly on here, these are my baskets that I proof in. They do come with a linen liner, which I don't really like. I prefer to just use flour. I just make sure to rub flour on them really well. So they're all floured now. Get some flour here. And what I'm also going to do is on the edge where I'm going to sort of dump it out, and I'll add a little flour, and then I add a little flour up at the top, and then use my hand, you can see, to gently work the dough off the plastic and out onto the counter. I don't want to overwork it here. I want to keep a lot of those bubbles. So I'm just gently letting it fall. Look at that nice mass of dough. I can move those. Stay. A tool I like to use is this little bench scraper. It works well for cutting this into 2, and then also when I go to clean up, just to scrape any leftovers off the counter and into the sink to be washed down. So I'm going to just eyeball this is about what half looks like. If it's not exact, it's okay. So push that one out of the way and grab this one. Now it's pretty sticky, so I'm going to add just a little sprinkle of flour, nothing too crazy. And then as working around, I just sort of grab some and bring it up into the center. So I'm sort of forming it into a ball by rolling it or wrapping it up onto itself, if that makes any sense. And then if I flip it over, you'll see this side is all nice and flat and smooth. Still a little bit stickier than usual. I'm just going to add a little flour to my hands so it doesn't stick. Moving it around, sort of grabbing it and pulling it on the counter helps seal that bottom where I have it all wrapped on top of itself. And then I grab one of my baskets, pick it up, and set it in. Beautiful. And then I'll do the other one. I'm just going to pull it into the center, add a little flour to my hands and to the bread, and again just working around and just pulling it up into the center, and then flipping it over. Turning it and pulling it. I'm adding that to the basket. Now what I do is clean up my mess, and then I am going to cover them with a tea towel and allow them to just sit and rest for about an hour or 2, depending on how warm. While I'm doing this now, it's winter and it's cold outside, so even though my heat is on in here, it still feels a little chilly. So it'll probably be close to 2 hours. So therefore, about 45 minutes or 1 hour into this proofing, I'm going to turn my oven on with my cast iron pot inside. So I will see you then. The loaves are beginning to rise, so I'm going to get the oven started. So I'm going to get the oven on and put my cast iron pot inside. So I'm setting it for 475. Highly recommend, if you've not ever checked the temperature of your stove, that you check it to see if it runs hot. If it does, you might want to turn your temperature down just a little bit. And the opposite is true as well. If it runs cool, turn it up a little bit. Now I'll let that preheat for about 45 minutes, and then we'll come back and bake some bread. The oven has been preheating for a good 45 minutes, probably almost closer to an hour. So now I'm going to put my first loaf in, pulling out my very hot crock pot. Sorry, a little smoky. Woo. And then we'll place the first loaf in. So I like to use parchment paper here, mostly because it helps get the bread out when it's all done. It also, of course, helps it not stick. My pan is also very well seasoned, so that as well helps. I'm going to do this over the sink. I'm just flipping this over. I don't know if you can see. As I bring it back, it looks like this, all nice and beautiful. Transferring it in. Let's straighten that up a little bit. Get my pot holder and get this back in the oven. I'll set the timer for 30 minutes, and then when that timer goes off, I will just take the top off and allow it to cook a few more minutes. It's been about 10 or 12 minutes since I took the top off. And it's looking nice and brown. Now comes the hard part, which is getting it out of the pan without burning myself. The pan is super scorching hot, and clearly this paper's seen better days. There it is, looking beautiful. Remove the paper so it can cool. And while this cools, we'll get the next one in the oven. And just simply invert, shake it out. It is going to get a little flour everywhere, so be aware. Pop it in and stick it back in the oven. "30 minutes with the top on, and then about 12 to 14 with the top off. Thanks for joining me. Again, my name is Tracy Martirana, and I use my knowledge of nutrition, Ayurveda, herbs, yoga, and meditation to bring you information and inspiration to help you live a healthy, happy, and balanced life. If you haven't already, please click the subscribe button, like my posts, share them with your friends. Doing so helps YouTube know that people are interested in content like mine. Thanks and have a great day.